The ruins of Zilkan had always been forbidden territory, a place where legends breathed and shadows walked. Every century, without fail, a monstrous storm would gather, and a single blinding bolt of lightning would strike the apex of the central pyramid. The local villagers would lock their doors and shutter their windows, whispering that the storm wasn't born in the heavens, but summoned from something ancient and terrible, sleeping deep beneath the earth. They spoke of a curse, a pact made in a forgotten age, and a power that should never be disturbed. But where they saw a warning, Dr. Amara Solis saw an invitation. She was an archaeologist, a woman of science and reason, and to her, myths were just history waiting to be deciphered. Amara dismissed the local folklore as the product of generational fear. She assembled her team, the best in their fields, driven by the promise of uncovering a civilization lost to time. The carvings on the temple's exterior were unlike anything she had ever seen. Depictions of an enormous, unblinking eye, orbited by 13 bleeding suns. Each sun dripped with what looked like molten gold, a motif that was both mesmerizing and deeply unsettling. She believed it was a complex astronomical calendar, a key to understanding the Zilkan people's mastery of the cosmos. She was convinced that the curse was merely a natural phenomenon, a unique geological or atmospheric event that the ancient people had mythologized. She couldn't have been more wrong. Guided by the eerie glow of their headlamps, they descended into the pyramid's heart. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with an energy that made the hairs on their arms stand on end. The walls were a labyrinth of passages, every surface covered in the same disturbing iconography. The eye was everywhere, watching them from the stone. It felt less like they were exploring a ruin and more like they were trespassing inside a living creature. As they went deeper, a low hum began to vibrate through the stone floor, a sound that seemed to resonate not in their ears, but in their very bones. It was a rhythmic pulse, like a slow, sleeping heartbeat. Finally, they broke through into a vast, cavernous chamber. At its center stood a monolithic altar of obsidian, polished to a mirror-like sheen. The carvings here were more vivid, more frantic. They depicted figures prostrating themselves before the great eye as the 13 suns above them cracked and shattered. The air thrummed with palpable power. As Amara approached the altar to examine the intricate inscriptions, her hand brushed against its surface. That was when the ground began to tremble violently. It wasn't an earthquake, it was something else, something awakening. The team stumbled, trying to keep their footing as the pyramid itself seemed to groan in protest. Then it happened. The hum escalated into a deafening roar. Cracks spiderwebbed across the chamber floor, not with darkness, but with a blinding crimson light. It was as if the very blood of the earth was boiling up to meet them. Panic set in. Amara shouted for her team to fall back, but her words were swallowed by the rising crescendo. The light pulsed from the cracks, casting their terrified faces in a hellish red glow. The stone eye carved above the altar began to weep a thick black substance, and the team knew, in that terrifying moment, that the legends were true. They had not come to uncover a forgotten history, they had stumbled into an active ritual. High above the pyramid, the sky was tearing itself apart. The villagers watched in horror as the storm they had feared for a century gathered with unprecedented fury. But this was no ordinary tempest. The clouds swirled not into a funnel, but into a colossal vortex, an iris of churning vapor and lightning. And then, from the center of that vortex, the heavens opened. A vast, living eye stared down upon the world, its sclera a canvas of cosmic nebula, its iris a burning star. Veins of pure fire pulsed across its surface like rivers of magma, and it fixed its gaze upon the land of Zilkan. It was awake. Down in the chamber, Amara and her team looked up as the ceiling above them dissolved into a portal of swirling red energy. They saw it, The same eye from the carvings, real and cosmically immense, looking down at them. They screamed, a raw, primal terror ripped from their lungs, but the sound was absorbed, silenced by the overwhelming hum of cosmic power. They were trapped, insignificant motes of dust in the gaze of a god. The eye blinked, a slow, deliberate movement that seemed to last an eternity. The world plunged into an impossible darkness, a void where even the stars seemed to have been extinguished, and when it opened again, the sun was gone. Now, there is no dawn, no dusk. The world is bathed in the perpetual unholy glow of a crimson twilight that never fades. The eye remains in the sky, a silent, ever-present monarch. Those who survived that day have been changed, their minds fractured by the sight of a truth too vast for human comprehension. The name of Zilkan is no longer a historical footnote. It is a curse whispered on the lips of those who are forced to live their lives beneath the crimson sky, forever dreaming of a sun they will never see again. They now understand that some doors are forbidden for a reason, and that the greatest discoveries are not always treasures, but sometimes they are the end of everything. Thank you for joining me on this journey into darkness. If you enjoy stories that explore the unknown and question our place in the cosmos, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more content like this. Stay curious, but be careful what you search for. You might just find it. They say some things are better left buried, lost to time, consigned to the dustbin of history, alongside forgotten gods and crumbling empires. But what if history refuses to stay dead? What if the past, with all its terrible power, decides to open its eyes and look right back at us? In the heart of what was once the mighty Aztec Empire, nestled among forgotten ruins, lies a legend whispered only in the deepest shadows. A legend of Tlalocan, the realm of the rain god and its silent guardian. They called it the Eye of the Gods, a phenomenon not built of stone or gold, but carved into the very fabric of the sky itself, a living, breathing reminder that the heavens see all. Every prayer, every offering, every whispered secret, every heartfelt sacrifice, every calculated lie, nothing escaped its gaze. Ancient texts, fragmented and singed by time, tell of a powerful connection between the heavens and the earth. When lightning, the fiery serpent of the sky, would strike the Great Pyramid, the priests of old would gather. Dressed in ceremonial robes, their faces painted with symbols of awe and fear, they would begin their ancient rituals. They would chant in tongues that have long since faded from human memory, their voices bleeding through the veil of time, a bridge between their world and something else. The legend says the Watcher wasn't always awake. It slept for millennia, a slumbering titan in the heavens, content in the knowledge that humanity remembered its place. They knew fear, they knew reverence, but the stories warned of a time when that fear would fade, a time when humanity, drunk on its own achievements, would forget the old ways, forget the power that slumbered above them. And on that day, the Watcher would awaken once more, to reclaim its gaze, to remind the world what it means to be seen. Now fast forward to our time, an age of sleek satellites and humming machines, an age where we map the stars and plumb the depths of the ocean. We believe we have conquered mystery, catalogued the unknown, and explained away the shadows with science. We live under a digital sky, a network of data and surveillance of our own making. We thought we were the only ones watching. We were wrong. The storm came without warning. Not a meteorological event, but something different. It wasn't rain that fell, but a chilling silence that blanketed the globe. And then it appeared. From Tokyo to New York, from orbiting space stations to remote research outposts in Antarctica, every camera, every lens, every screen pointed at the sky began to capture the same impossible image. Hovering directly above the ancient ruins of Tlalocan, A colossal crimson eye. It didn't blink, it didn't move, it just watched. The world's governments scrambled. Emergency broadcasts filled the airwaves, their message unified, rehearsed. An unprecedented atmospheric illusion, a rare plasma phenomenon, a trick of light and dust. They showed us charts. They brought on experts. They used big words to soothe our primal fears. They tried to wrap the terrifying unknown in a comfortable blanket of scientific jargon. They told us not to worry. They told us it was nothing. But the people knew better. Deep in our bones, in the ancient animal part of our brains that still remembers the dark, we knew this was no illusion. You could feel it. A pressure, a weight, the chilling sensation of being scrutinized not by a camera, but by a consciousness vast and utterly alien. It started subtly. A news report about a missing astronomer who had been obsessively analyzing the phenomenon. A social media post about a conspiracy theorist who streamed himself staring at the live feed for hours, only for his stream to cut to static, his apartment later found empty. The disappearances were isolated at first, easily dismissed. Runaways, accidents, coincidences. But the pattern became undeniable. The one thing that connected every single missing person was their fixation on the image of the eye. They would watch the footage for hours, captivated, mesmerized. Friends and family reported a change in their behavior. They'd become withdrawn, paranoid, whispering about being watched. They would complain of a faint, persistent, static sound in their ears. And then the evidence left behind. At the scene of every disappearance in the place where a human being once stood, authorities would find only two things: a single, perfect drop of blood on the floor, and a whisper, a faint electronic ghost of a voice captured on nearby recording devices, hidden within the static of a dead television or a silent phone line. The same two words, spoken in a voice that was neither male nor female, a voice that sounded like the rustling of dead leaves and the crackle of distant lightning. It said, "I see you." Panic is a virus, and it was spreading faster than any official explanation could contain it. People began to cover their windows, to shut off their screens, to blind themselves to the sky. The very technology we created to connect our world had become a conduit for this ancient terror. The eye was in our phones, on our televisions, on our computers. It was everywhere. There was no looking away, not really. Specialized teams were sent to the ruins. Soldiers and scientists equipped with the best technology our modern world could offer. They went in with confidence, with instruments designed to measure and analyze. None of them returned. Their last transmission was a frantic scream, drowned out by that same horrifying static. The drop of blood was later found on the lens of their own fallen camera. We tried to fight back. We tried to blind it. We launched missiles. We directed high-energy lasers at its position, anything to make it close its eye, to make it look away. But the weapons simply vanished as they approached, absorbed into that crimson abyss without a trace. It was like throwing pebbles at a hurricane. We were not at war. We were being observed, judged. Now the world is quiet. The bustling noise of our civilization has been replaced by a collective held breath. We live in the shadow of the Watcher, under its unblinking silent judgment. We don't know what it wants or what it will do next. We only know that it sees us. It sees our every move. It hears our every fear. And we know that to meet its gaze is to be erased. The static is getting louder, isn't it? You can almost hear it now, at the edge of your hearing. A faint whisper, carried on the waves of the very device you're using to listen to this. Be careful how long you stare at the screen. Be careful what you let into your home. The eye of the gods has awakened, and it's been waiting a very, very long time to see you. Have you ever wondered what existed before the sprawling concrete and endless noise of our cities, before the first brick was laid, before the first road was paved? Imagine a time when silence was not just an absence of sound, but a tangible presence. A time when a secluded monastery stood, a place no one dared to approach. The monks there didn't worship gods of light or sky. They worshipped something they called the Weaver, a being born of cloth and shadow, dwelling in the sacred space between sound and silence. Centuries later, the monastery was nothing but ruins, forgotten by time. That is, until archaeologist Miriam Lawn stumbled upon it during an excavation. Miriam was a woman of science and reason. She documented everything, from the crumbling walls to the strange, unsettling carvings that adorned them. These carvings depicted a faceless god with 8 spidery arms, not weaving thread, but spinning silence itself into solid form. She noted it in her journal, dismissing it as a fascinating but primitive myth, a forgotten deity for a forgotten people. After all, gods don't exist. Not really. She was wrong. It began subtly. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, dancing shadows across the excavation site, the wind changed. It was no longer a simple breeze rustling through ancient stones. It began to hum, a low, resonant frequency that vibrated deep in her chest. It sounded almost human, a chorus of hushed whispers just on the edge of hearing. Miriam tried to rationalize it, the acoustics of the ruins, fatigue playing tricks on her mind, but a cold dread, primal and insistent, began to creep into her heart. She packed up her tools, the humming seeming to follow her, a constant, unnerving companion. That night, alone in her tent, sleep offered no escape. The humming grew louder, no longer just a sound, but a physical pressure against her eardrums. The fabric of her tent began to tremble, not from wind, but from something else, something inside. She froze, every instinct screaming. A shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness of the tent's corner. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was unfolding, elongating, taking shape. 8 long, slender arms, wrapped in what looked like ancient frayed bandages, unfurled like the petals of some nightmarish flower. It was him, the Weaver, just as the carvings had depicted. Miriam was paralyzed by a terror so pure it felt like ice water flooding her veins. She tried to scream, to make any sound at all, but her throat was constricted, her lungs refusing to draw air. The creature glided across the small space, impossibly silent, its cloth-wrapped limbs making no sound on the canvas floor. It was a void, a hole in the world that swallowed all noise. It loomed over her cot, its faceless head tilting with an unnerving curiosity. One of its 8 hands, wrapped in pale, shimmering silk, reached for her. Time seemed to slow as it drifted towards her face, gentle as a falling leaf, and placed its fingers upon her lips. A voice echoed, not in the tent, but directly inside her mind. It was 1,000 whispers speaking as one, a dry, rustling sound like dead leaves skittering across pavement. Noise, it whispered, the single word carrying the weight of eons of silent contempt. So much noise! The pressure on her lips wasn't forceful, yet it was absolute. It was the crushing weight of utter, complete silence. A silence that wasn't empty, but full of a power she couldn't comprehend. The last thing she saw was the intricate pattern of the silk, impossibly fine, impossibly pale, as the world dissolved into a quiet, suffocating darkness. She was finally blessedly silent. Days later, when Miriam failed to check in, a rescue team was dispatched. They found the campsite eerily quiet, too quiet. The birds were silent. The wind made no sound. Her tent was undisturbed, everything in its place. Inside, they found her. She was sitting upright on her cot, her eyes wide open, staring at nothing. Her expression was calm, almost peaceful, but her mouth was sewn shut with a pale, gleaming silk thread, the stitches impossibly neat and tight. She was alive, but trapped within a fortress of silence she could never escape. On the small table beside her cot, her archaeological notebook lay open. Every page was filled with her meticulous notes, sketches, and observations. It was all perfectly intact. The team leader picked it up, flipping to the final entry. There, on the last page, was a detailed, frantic drawing of the 8-armed creature, the Weaver. It was a chillingly accurate depiction of the entity from the ancient carvings. But beneath her drawing there was a new line, a sentence written in her own familiar handwriting, yet the letters were shaky, as if penned by a hand guided by an unseen force. It read, "It is still weaving." The rescue team packed up the evidence, their hushed words feeling like a sacrilege in the profound stillness of the valley. They carried Miriam out, a living monument to a forgotten god's return. They never spoke of what they truly saw, of the chilling silence that clung to the air like a shroud. But they knew that somewhere, in the spaces between our noisy lives, in the quiet moments we so desperately seek, something is listening, something is waiting. And in the heart of that ancient, patient silence, the Weaver continues its work. It spins and it weaves, not with thread, but with the quiet terror of a world that has forgotten how to be silent. It is still weaving. So, the next time you find yourself in a place of absolute quiet, listen carefully. Don't listen for a sound. Listen to the silence itself. Feel its texture, its weight, and pray you don't feel it weaving around you. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the quiet dark. For over 3 millennia, a secret lay buried deep beneath the shifting sands of Egypt, a passage sealed away from time itself. An excavation team, led by the renowned Dr. Aris Thorne, believed they had found the lost tomb of a forgotten pharaoh. The air, thick with the dust of ages, crackled with anticipation as they broke the final seal. Inside, it wasn't a sarcophagus or piles of treasure that greeted them, but a single towering figure. It stood at the heart of the chamber, perfectly preserved, draped in robes the color of dried blood, its hands clutching a gleaming golden staff. The team marveled at it, calling it the finest statue ever recovered from the ancient world. They took photos, made notes, their voices echoing in the hallowed silence. They were so busy, so captivated by their discovery, that they didn't notice the subtle shift in the air, the drop in temperature. They thought it was a masterpiece of ancient art, until its eyes, obsidian and depthless, slowly opened. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came as a whisper. Dr. Halim, the team's linguist, was trying to decipher the strange, unfamiliar hieroglyphs on the wall when he heard it. A faint, rasping sound like sand scraping against stone. It wasn't the wind. It was a voice, ancient and dry, reciting names that had been erased from history, names no living tongue should ever know. He tried to tell the others, but his words were dismissed as a trick of the mind, the effects of dehydration and exhaustion in the deep, suffocating dark. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent, slithering into the minds of each crew member. The first to go was Kenji, the photographer. He was setting up a shot of the crimson-robed figure when he let out a strangled cry. He stumbled back, his eyes wide with a terror no one else could see, and then he simply vanished. His camera clattered to the floor, its lens shattered. Panic, cold and sharp, ripped through the remaining team members. They scrambled for the exit, but the passage they had entered through was gone, replaced by a solid wall of stone. They were trapped. The whispers were no longer just sounds. They were thoughts, memories that weren't their own, flooding their minds with images of ancient rituals and sacrifices made in the dark. One by one, they were picked off. A scream would echo from a dark corner, followed by a sudden chilling silence. Dr. Thorne, a man of science and logic, found his rationality crumbling. He saw shadows moving where there was no light, felt phantom hands brushing against his skin. The figure in the center of the room never moved, yet its presence was everywhere. a suffocating weight pressing down on them. The last thing Dr. Halim saw before the darkness took him was the faint, almost imperceptible curl of the statue's lips. It was a smile. Days turned into an eternity. The outside world, knowing only that the team's communications had gone silent, sent a rescue party. They followed the excavation coordinates, blasted through the rockfall that had mysteriously blocked the entrance, and descended into the tomb. They expected to find survivors, or at the very least, evidence of what had happened. They found a chamber that was eerily pristine. The team's equipment was neatly stacked against one wall, their personal effects placed in small, orderly piles. It was as if the original excavation team had never been there at all. The air was still, silent, and cold. The only thing that remained was the crimson-robed figure, standing tall and impassive at the center of the room, its golden staff gleaming in the rescuer's torchlight. It looked exactly as it had in the initial photographs sent by Dr. Thorne, a beautiful, lifeless statue. But one of the rescuers, a young archaeologist named Samira, noticed something different. The walls. The original reports mentioned smooth, unadorned stone walls in the central chamber, but now they were covered in new carvings. She ran her light over them, her breath catching in her throat. There were 7 distinct carvings, etched into the stone with impossible precision. They were faces, the faces of Dr. Thorne, Dr. Halim, Kenji, and the rest of the vanished team. Each one was captured in a moment of pure, unadulterated terror, their mouths open in a silent scream, their eyes wide with an agony that transcended stone. It was a gallery of tormented souls, forever imprisoned in the walls of the tomb. As Samira stared in horror, she felt a chill run down her spine. She looked back at the statue. It seemed different, taller somehow, more solid. Its obsidian eyes seemed to gleam with a newfound vitality. And then she saw it, the faintest trace of a smile on its carved lips. A knowing, satisfied smile. The rescuer next to her, a burly man named Omar, scoffed. "Just a statue," he said, turning away. "Let's figure out where they went." But Samira couldn't look away. She understood then. This wasn't a tomb for a pharaoh, it was a prison, and the figure wasn't a statue. It was a jailer, a keeper. For millennia, it had stood guard, silent and waiting. But the excavation team had broken the seal, not of a tomb, but of its slumber. They had become the new guardians, their life force absorbed, their faces added to the eternal watch. The rescuers were now inside, the passage behind them seeming darker, narrower than before. The chamber was sealed once more. And in the center of it all, the keeper of the tomb stood, its crimson robe seeming to pulse with a faint dark light. It was patient, it had all the time in the world, and it was hungry for new faces to add to its collection. Have you ever heard stories of those who seek immortality? The tales of Deals struck with forgotten gods, promising eternal life in exchange for unwavering service. They're often dismissed as myths, cautionary tales whispered around crackling fires. But some myths are rooted in a truth far more terrifying than any story. This is one such truth. Our story begins with a legend, one lost to the sands of time. It spoke of a high priest, a man so devout he wished to serve his deity beyond the mortal coil. He prayed for an eternity of servitude, and the god, pleased by his loyalty, granted his wish. The priest was given power beyond comprehension, the ability to command the very elements, to see beyond the veil of time. But this gift came at a terrible price, a cost that would only be revealed in the suffocating silence of his eternal duty. Centuries passed. The world changed. Empires rose and fell, and the priest's temple was swallowed by the earth, its grand halls buried beneath layers of history and neglect. The god he served faded into obscurity, his name erased from the tongues of men. Yet the priest remained, a steadfast, solitary guardian in a forgotten tomb. His promise was eternal, and so was his curse. Now let's shift our focus to a man named Kale. Kale was a traveler, a seeker of lost artifacts and forgotten histories. He was driven not by greed but by an insatiable curiosity, a desire to touch the past. His journeys had taken him to the most remote corners of the world, through sun-scorched deserts and treacherous mountain passes. It was during one such expedition, while chasing a rumor of a sunken temple of the silent god, that he found himself caught in a brutal, unforgiving sandstorm. The wind howled like a vengeful spirit, whipping sand into a blinding frenzy. The sky turned a sickening shade of ochre and the sun vanished. Kyle's supplies were low, his water nearly gone. Disoriented and desperate, he stumbled forward, searching for any semblance of shelter. Just as his strength began to fail, he saw it, a dark fissure in the face of a towering cliff, an entrance that seemed to have been torn open by the storm itself. With the last of his energy, Kyle crawled into the opening, collapsing just inside as the storm raged on behind him. The air within was still and cool, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. It was thick, heavy with the cloying scent of ancient incense and something else, something dry and dusty, like a tomb that hadn't been disturbed for millennia. When he finally caught his breath and his eyes adjusted to the gloom, he realized he wasn't in a simple cave. He was in a man-made structure. Carved walls rose into the darkness above, adorned with faded frescoes depicting celestial battles and divine beings. A path of worn flagstones led deeper into the blackness. A flicker of light in the distance caught his eye. Hope, or perhaps just his unyielding curiosity, urged him forward. He lit his own small lantern, its glow pushing back the oppressive shadows, and followed the distant torchlight. The passage opened into a vast chamber. In the center, a single torch sputtered in a rusted sconce, casting long, dancing shadows. And there, beside the torch, stood a figure. It was a man, or what was left of one. He was unnaturally tall and thin, draped in tattered red robes that might have once been magnificent. His skin was stretched tight over his bones, dry and brittle like ancient parchment. But it was his eyes that froze Kale in place. They glowed with a faint internal light, like embers in a dying fire, holding a weariness that spoke of countless, sleepless ages. The figure didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. He simply watched Kyle approach. Kyle, an experienced explorer accustomed to strange sights, felt a primal fear he had never known before. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to face the storm rather than this relic. "You seek shelter from the storm." The figure's voice was a dry rasp, like stones grinding together. It wasn't a question. "Many have, over the long years. They find their way here when the sands shift and the old ways are revealed." Kyle swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. Who are you?" A long, drawn-out sigh escaped the man's lips, a sound like dust settling. "I am the guardian, the servant, the anchor that holds this place between what is and what was." He lifted a hand, impossibly thin fingers gesturing to the surrounding darkness. "This is the gate of the silent god. I was his most favored priest. I asked for the honor of serving him for eternity." The story from the legends clicked into place in Kale's mind. This was him, the priest who defied death. "He granted my wish," the priest continued, his glowing eyes never leaving Kale's. "He bound my soul to this temple, to guard his gate until the stars fall from the sky. He gave me power." The priest tapped a long, gnarled staff against the stone floor, and a low hum vibrated through Kale's bones. But he neglected to mention the cost. Immortality is not life. It is merely the absence of death, a slow, unending decay. The priest took a shuffling step forward. "My body withers, but cannot die. My mind frays but cannot break. I have watched the world change through the cracks in my prison. I have seen generations live and die, love and lose, all while I stand here, unchanging, alone. A chilling realization dawned on Kale. The way the priest looked at him, it wasn't with malice, but with a deep, profound longing. The god is silent now, the priest rasped, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He has faded, perhaps forgotten even himself. But his magic remains, the pact remains. A guardian must always stand at the gate. He took another step, closer now. My service is done. I have paid my price 1,000 times over. The pact does not demand me. It only demands a soul to take my place. Kyle's heart hammered against his ribs. No, he breathed, taking a step back. I'm just a traveler. I don't want any part of this. You have no choice, the priest said, a hint of something that might have been pity in his voice. You are the first to find this place in over a century, the first soul to wander into my reach. The pact is old, and it is hungry. It demands a warden. Panic seized Kyle. He turned to run, to flee back into the storm, back to the world of the living. But he was too slow. The priest was no longer a frail, shuffling old man. He moved with a speed that defied his decrepit form. The gnarled staff slammed onto the stone floor with a deafening crack. The entire temple shuddered. Dust and stone rained from the ceiling. The entrance Kale had crawled through sealed itself shut with a grinding finality. He was trapped. He turned back, his lantern light trembling, to see the priest standing before him, his ember-like eyes now blazing. The power he spoke of crackled in the air around him, a visible, suffocating aura. The transfer requires a willing vessel, but the pact has loopholes, the priest hissed, a cruel, broken smile cracking his dry lips. A soul can be persuaded. He raised his staff. Kale felt an unseen force grab him, lifting him from his feet, holding him suspended and helpless in the air. A searing pain, cold and hot at once, lanced through him. It felt as if his very essence, his memories, his hopes, his identity were being pulled from him, drawn out like thread from a spool. He screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the ancient stones. He saw the priest's form begin to change. The parchment-like skin gained a hint of color. The glowing embers in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated relief. As Kale's life force was drained, the priest's was restored. The ancient servant was becoming a man again, his eternal sentence finally ending. Kale's consciousness flickered. His last sensation was of falling, his body hitting the cold floor. The world dissolved into a swirling vortex of red, the color of the priest's robes, the color of the burning embers that were now igniting behind his own eyes. When silence returned to the chamber, it was broken by a single, slow, labored breath. Where Kyle had fallen, a new figure now stood. Tall, thin, and draped in tattered red robes. The face was different, younger, but the eyes held the same ancient weariness, glowing with a faint internal light. The staff was in his hand. He felt the weight of it, the power humming within. He felt the crushing weight of the centuries, the solitude, the unbreakable vow. He was the guardian now. He was the anchor. He was the eternal servant. And on the floor, where the priest had stood, lay the desiccated, crumbling remains of a body that had finally been granted the release of death. As the dust settled, the new priest stood motionless, his burning eyes fixed on the sealed entrance, waiting for the storm to pass, waiting for the decades or centuries to crawl by, waiting for the next lost soul to stumble upon the gate of the silent God and offer him a chance at release. The cycle was complete, and yet it had just begun. They say some places are best left alone, places that whisper on the wind, places where the earth itself seems to hold a dark secret. Hollow Glen is one of those places. The locals have stories, of course. They talk about it in hushed tones, warning outsiders to stay away, especially in the spring. They say that when the first thaw comes, the trees in Hollow Glen don't just weep sap, they bleed it. A thick, dark fluid that smells like decay, like something ancient and rotten has been disturbed. They say the ground itself isn't stable, that it shifts and groans, like a great beast stirring in its sleep. These were the tales that drew Jonah in. He wasn't a believer, not really. He was a skeptic with a camera, a documentarian of the strange and unexplained. He made a living chasing down local legends, debunking ghost stories, and capturing the mundane reality behind the myths. For him, Hollow Glen was just another project, another collection of tall tales to be neatly packaged into a compelling video. He imagined shots of dripping sap, close-ups of the unusual soil, interviews with frightened locals. He thought he was hunting for proof of a curse. He had no idea he was walking into its embrace. He went in on a damp Tuesday, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and that sickly sweet rot the legends described. The woods were unnervingly quiet. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals. Just the squelch of his boots on the sodden ground and the rhythmic beat of his own heart. He set up his tripod, his breath fogging in the cool air, and began to film. The trees did indeed seem to bleed, a dark, viscous substance oozing from cracks in their bark. The ground felt spongy, almost alive beneath his feet. It was creepy, sure, but it was just nature being weird. That's what he told himself. He ventured deeper, drawn by a morbid curiosity, his camera a shield between him and the oppressive atmosphere of the glen. He was looking for the heart of the legend, the one thing that would make his trip worthwhile. And then he saw it. Hanging from the thick, low branch of an ancient oak was something that defied all logic, something that made the blood freeze in his veins and the camera slip from his suddenly nerveless fingers. It wasn't an animal, not one he could name. It was a thing. Bloated and immense, at least 6 feet long, its skin a jaundiced, sickly yellow. The flesh was puckered and uneven, marred by weeping sores that leaked the same dark fluid as the trees. It pulsed, a slow, rhythmic contraction, as if it were breathing. It was a caterpillar, a grotesque parody of one, magnified to a nightmare scale. But that wasn't what made Jonah's mind shatter. It wasn't the monstrous body or the open wounds. It was the face. At one end of the putrid form, where a head should be, was a face. A human face. Pale and swollen, the features stretched and distorted, but undeniably human. The eyes were closed, the skin waxy and translucent. It looked like a death mask, a horrifying sculpture fused onto this larval body. Jonah stood paralyzed, every instinct screaming at him to run, but his feet were rooted to the shifting soil. He couldn't process what he was seeing. It felt like a hallucination, a waking nightmare brought on by the strange fumes of the forest. He fumbled for his camera, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip it. He had to capture this. No one would ever believe him otherwise. This was the proof he'd come for, a proof so monstrous it would redefine everything. He raised the camera, his eye pressed to the viewfinder, trying to steady his frantic breathing. And as he focused the lens, the world tilted on its axis. The creature stirred, the closed eyes on the human face fluttered. Slowly, agonizingly, they opened. They were milky white, devoid of pupils, but they fixed on him. They saw him. And then the mouth, a pale slit in the swollen flesh, stretched open. It opened impossibly wide, the skin at the corners tearing. A sound tore through the silence of the glen, a sound that wasn't animal or human, but some terrible hybrid of the two. It was a high, thin shriek, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony, and woven within that scream, distorted and stretched, was a single, chilling word. His name. Jonah! The sound hit him like a physical blow. He stumbled back, dropping the camera for good this time. It landed with a soft thud on the mossy ground, its lens still pointing at the horror on the branch. He didn't care. He just ran. He scrambled through the undergrowth, branches whipping at his face, the sound of that scream echoing in his head, chasing him out of the cursed woods. He didn't stop running until the rotten smell was gone and the sounds of the normal world, the chirping of birds, the distant hum of a road, returned to his ears. Weeks passed. Jonah never went back. He couldn't. He abandoned his expensive equipment, his project, everything. He tried to tell people what he saw, but the words came out jumbled, the ravings of a madman. They said he'd been spooked by a shadow, that the woods had played tricks on his mind. He was found wandering miles from the glen, dehydrated and incoherent. They said he was suffering from exposure. Eventually, a park ranger, following up on the report of abandoned gear, ventured into Hollow Glen. He found Jonah's setup exactly where he'd left it. The tripod was still standing, and the camera lay beside it on the ground, undamaged. The forest was quiet, the air clean. There was nothing out of the ordinary. The ranger packed up the equipment, logging it as lost property. Later, back at the station, curiosity got the better of him. He powered on the camera to see what the owner had been filming. He scrolled through the footage. Long, panning shots of trees, close-ups of dripping sap, the unsteady, shaky footage of someone walking deeper into the woods. It was all fairly standard, if a little eerie. Then he got to the last file. It wasn't a video, it was a single, still frame, captured in the instant the camera hit the ground. The image was tilted, slightly out of focus, but the subject was terrifyingly clear. It showed the bloated yellow caterpillar thing hanging from the branch. But something was happening. A long vertical split had appeared down the length of its back, the sickly flesh tearing apart like a seam. The rupture was wide, and from within the dark, wet interior, something was pushing its way out. It was pale and slender, with 5 distinct digits at its end. It was a human arm. The ranger stared at the screen, the color draining from his face. The official report would state that the camera's memory card was corrupted. The final image was never spoken of again. Hollow Glen remains, as it always has, a place of dark whispers. And every spring, when the trees begin to bleed, the locals stay inside, wondering what new form will emerge from the cursed soil, and whose face it will be wearing this time. Some scientific pursuits are born from a noble desire to understand the world. Others, however, spring from a much darker place, a relentless obsession that blurs the line between genius and madness. This is the story of Dr. Harold Keene, a man whose fascination with evolution led him down a path from which there was no return. It all started innocently enough. Dr. Keene was a brilliant biologist, celebrated for his groundbreaking research into cellular regeneration. He would spend countless hours in his lab, mesmerized by the simple yet profound miracle of a tadpole becoming a frog, or a caterpillar weaving itself into a chrysalis, emerging as a new being. He saw in these transformations the very essence of life's potential, a blueprint for overcoming decay and mortality. He believed nature held the key to unlocking humanity's next evolutionary leap. But as the years passed, his fascination curdled into an obsession. He wasn't content just observing these miracles. He wanted to command them. He began to see the limitations of the human form as a cage, a flawed design that needed radical improvement. His research notes, once filled with precise scientific observations, started to feature frantic philosophical scribblings about transcending biological destiny. His colleagues grew concerned. They saw the wild, feverish look in his eyes and heard the unsettling passion in his voice when he spoke of breaking the chains of our DNA. They warned him, But Dr. Keene saw their caution as a lack of vision. He believed they were content to study the Book of Life, while he was determined to write a new chapter. His work veered into forbidden territory. He started splicing DNA with a recklessness that defied all ethical boundaries. He wanted to create a serum, a concoction that would trigger a controlled, accelerated evolution in a human subject. He began with moths, specifically the lunar moth, whose ethereal beauty and incredible transformation he found deeply symbolic. He combined its genetic material with human DNA, convinced this fusion would grant heightened senses and the ability to regenerate. But there was another component, a third strand of DNA he harvested from a source so obscure, so ancient, that he refused to document it. He referred to it in his notes only as the primordial catalyst. This was his secret ingredient, the wild card he believed would unlock true metamorphosis. After months of secluded, feverish work, his serum was ready. It was a viscous, iridescent liquid that swirled with an unnatural greenish glow. His assistants, who had long been kept in the dark about the true nature of his project, looked at the vial with a mixture of awe and terror. They begged him not to proceed, to run simulations, to consider the catastrophic risks. But Dr. Keene was beyond listening. He saw himself as a pioneer on the brink of a discovery that would redefine humanity. There was only one logical test subject worthy of such a monumental experiment: himself. With a steady hand, he filled a syringe. He looked at his own reflection in the polished steel of his lab equipment. A man in his late 50s, his face lined with stress and sleepless nights, but his eyes burning with an unholy conviction. This, he believed, was the last time he would see this frail, mortal form. He administered the injection, plunging the needle deep into his own arm. A jolt, cold and electric, shot through his veins. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a wave of nausea washed over him, followed by a dizzying euphoria. He laughed, a triumphant, breathless sound that echoed in the sterile silence of the lab. He had done it. The great work had begun. The transformation was not the glorious, instantaneous rebirth he had envisioned. It was slow, agonizing. During the first week, a strange lethargy took hold of him. His skin grew soft and unusually pale, almost translucent. Then, the splitting began. Small, painful fissures appeared on his back and limbs, oozing a clear, viscous fluid. Patches of his skin lost their pigment, turning a waxy, sickly green, reminiscent of the very caterpillars he had once studied with such academic detachment. His bones ached with a deep, grinding pain, as if they were being reshaped from within. Walking became a chore. His legs felt unsteady, as if they no longer understood their function. He spent most of his time hunched over, his body racked with violent shivers. His assistants watched in horror. They tried to help, but he waved them away, hissing that this was a necessary, beautiful pain, the agony of rebirth. He documented every grotesque change with clinical detachment, his handwriting growing more erratic with each passing day. He wrote of new sensations, of his sense of smell heightening to an almost unbearable degree, of the world appearing brighter, sharper, yet alien. By the second week, he could no longer stand upright. His spine had softened, and his body began to elongate, to swell. He crawled, dragging his increasingly useless limbs behind him. His fine suits and lab coat were shredded, discarded in a pile, as his form continued to contort. The most terrifying change was to his voice. His eloquent speeches on evolutionary theory were replaced by choked, guttural gasps. He tried to speak, to form words, but his vocal cords could no longer produce human sounds. All that came out were wet, rasping noises that sounded like a desperate struggle for air. His face, however, remained unnervingly human, a mask of his former self stretched over a monstrous, burgeoning new body. The terror in his eyes was unmistakable, a silent scream from a consciousness trapped within a biological nightmare of its own making. The breaking point for his assistants came at the start of the 3rd week. They entered the lab to find him, or what was left of him. Curled in the center of the room was a monstrous creature, a swollen, segmented thing easily 12 feet long. Its skin was a mottled green and brown, glistening under the lab lights. And at its head was the contorted, human-faced visage of Dr. Harold Keene, his eyes wide with a primal fear and a profound, bottomless sorrow. It was a grotesque parody of a caterpillar, a being forever trapped between species, neither man nor insect. The sight was too much. They fled, screaming, sealing the laboratory door behind them, leaving their mentor to his fate. The lab fell silent, a tomb for a man who had dared to play God and lost. But the story doesn't end there. The sealed laboratory became a local legend, a place of grim fascination. Locals and thrill-seekers would sometimes creep close to the reinforced steel door at night, pressing their ears against the cold metal. And on quiet nights, when the wind was just right, they claimed you could hear something from within. It wasn't the roar of a monster or the hiss of an insect. It was a sound far more chilling, a soft, weeping whisper, distorted and wet, but unmistakably born from human despair. It was the voice of the creature that was once Dr. Keene, repeating the same heartbreaking phrase over and over, a mantra of his failed ambition. I'm not done evolving. Thank you so much for watching. The story of Dr. Keene is a haunting reminder of where unchecked ambition can lead. What did you find most terrifying about his transformation? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoy stories that explore the darker side of science and human nature, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more content like this. Stay curious, but stay safe. Deep within the twisted, craggy peaks of the mountain Tharkul, a realm of shadows and stolen gold lay hidden from the sun. Here, the Goblin King reigned supreme. His crown, a grotesque masterpiece forged from the melted treasures of conquered lands, gleamed with a greedy light, brighter than any torch in his sprawling subterranean kingdom. In his gnarled hand, he clutched his scepter, a fearsome iron mace, its head studded with the glittering gems of fallen kingdoms. This scepter was his greatest pride, but it was also his deepest curse, a truth known only to him and the silent, shimmering stones embedded within it. Every 100 years, as the stars aligned in a forgotten constellation, the Goblin King would extend a perilous invitation to the mortal world. He offered a bargain, wealth beyond the wildest dreams of any king or merchant, riches that could save a starving nation or build an empire overnight. All he asked in return was a single night in his court, a test of bravery and wit for any soul daring enough to venture into his domain. But there was always a price, a hidden clause in the unwritten contract, a cost far greater than mere courage. This century, the call was answered by Prince Alaric. His kingdom, once green and prosperous, was now blighted by a creeping famine. The fields were barren, the rivers had slowed to a trickle, and his people's faces were etched with despair. Having exhausted every other option, Alaric heard the whispers of the Goblin King's bargain, a dark, desperate hope. He journeyed to Tharkul, his heart a heavy mix of resolve and dread, seeking the fortune that could save his dying land. He was a good man, a noble prince, but he did not understand the true nature of the Goblin's game. He didn't realize that every single, dazzling gem on that terrible mace held a story, the story of a trapped soul. The great iron gates of the Goblin Kingdom groaned open for him, revealing a cavernous throne room. Stalactites like the teeth of a great beast hung from the ceiling, and rivers of molten gold flowed in channels carved into the stone floor. Goblins with eyes like polished obsidian scurried in the shadows, their whispers like the skittering of insects. and on a throne of jagged black rock sat the Goblin King. His smile was a slash of filed teeth, and his eyes held an ancient, chilling amusement. "So," the Goblin King rasped, his voice like grinding stones, "a princeling comes to beg. Your lands are dust, your people starve. I can change that." He gestured with a clawed hand, and a section of the stone wall slid away, revealing a vault that pulsed with the light of 1,000,000 treasures. Mountains of gold coins, ropes of pearls, and diamonds the size of a man's fist spilled onto the floor. It was a sight that could blind a man with its sheer, overwhelming avarice. "All of this," the king hissed, "can be yours. Enough to make your kingdom a paradise for 1,000 years. Alaric's breath caught in his throat. He saw the faces of his people in the gleam of the gold, healthy, fed, and happy. It was everything he had ever wanted. What is your price?" he asked, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. The Goblin King's grin widened. "A simple thing, your crown, your title. You will serve me here in my court. A small price for the salvation of so many, wouldn't you agree? A prince in my court is a fine trophy indeed." He presented Alaric with a golden goblet filled with a shimmering dark wine. "Drink, and the pact is sealed. Your kingdom will flourish, and you will have a new home." Alaric looked from the goblet to the king's scepter, which rested against the arm of the throne. He noticed how the gems seemed to pulse with a faint, internal light, almost like captured fireflies. He had heard tales, fireside stories meant to scare children, about the Goblin King's collection. They said he didn't just take gold, he took memories, he took names, he took souls. Suddenly the treasure before him seemed less like a salvation and more like a gilded cage. He saw the trap for what it was. This wasn't a bargain. It was a trade of one life for the prosperity of others, a prosperity built on a foundation of eternal servitude. "And what of those who came before me?" Alaric asked, his gaze fixed on a brilliant blue sapphire on the mace. It seemed to swirl with a deep, forgotten sadness. "What small price did they pay?" The Goblin King's amusement flickered, replaced by a flash of annoyance. "They made their choice. They were weak. They saw only the gold." "They saw what you wanted them to see," Alaric countered, his courage returning. He thought of his kingdom, not as a land to be saved at any cost, but as a people whose honor was worth more than gold. To accept this deal would be to betray the very spirit of his lineage. He pushed the goblet away. "I refuse your offer. My kingdom will find its own way, with honor. We will not be saved by a devil's bargain." For a moment, there was a stunned silence in the vast cavern. The skittering goblins froze, their wide eyes fixed on the defiant prince. Then a low chuckle rumbled from the Goblin King's chest, growing into a full-throated, echoing laugh that shook the very stones of the mountain. It was a sound devoid of humor, filled only with a cold, predatory triumph. "Honor?" the king sneered, his eyes glowing with malice. "A noble sentiment, but a useless one." He stood, his hunched form surprisingly tall and menacing. He hefted his iron scepter, the gems flaring with an unnatural light. "You think you can just walk away? You think my bargain has a no option?" He swung the heavy mace once, a casual, almost lazy arc through the air. The weapon whistled, and for a split second, Alaric saw a flash of crimson light erupt from the point of impact that never came. There was no pain, no sound of a blow. There was only a sudden, enveloping emptiness. The next morning, as the first faint rays of a distant sun pierced the gloom of the goblin realm, a new gem shone upon the king's scepter. It was a brilliant, fiery crimson, the color of a prince's courage and a dying kingdom's hope. It glittered with a fierce, defiant light, brighter and more beautiful than all the rest. The Goblin King admired it for a long moment, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across his face. The bargain had been refused, yes, but a price was always paid, and his collection was now one soul richer. Gather round, lore keepers and adventurers, for a tale dug from the deepest, darkest corners of the earth. This is the story of Gromthar, the Goblin King, and the insatiable greed that forged a kingdom only to consume it from within. Our story begins in an age of fire and ruin, an epoch when mighty dragons ruled the skies and scorched the very surface of the world. Life above ground was a desperate daily struggle against claws and flame. For the goblin race, survival meant retreat. It meant abandoning the sun, the sky, and everything they knew. They fled, not scattered to the winds, but downwards into the cold, silent embrace of the earth. Leading this great exodus was a goblin of unparalleled ambition and ruthless cunning, Gromthar. He was not just a survivor, he was a visionary, albeit one whose vision was shrouded in darkness. He saw not a tomb in the depths, but a throne. He drove his people deeper and deeper, through lightless chasms and treacherous tunnels, until they reached the planet's very heart. There, in a world unseen by any surface dweller, they found wonders beyond imagination. Rivers of molten gold flowed like water, casting a warm, perpetual twilight. Caverns vast enough to hold mountains glittered with veins of crystal that pulsed with an inner, magical light. This was their new world, their sanctuary, their canvas. And Gromthar was its artist. With iron will and the relentless labor of his people, he carved a kingdom from the living rock. Grand halls rose from the cavern floors, their arches so high they seemed to kiss the stone ceiling. Intricate cities were sculpted into the walls, connected by bridges spanning rivers of liquid gold. The entire kingdom was illuminated by the natural ethereal glow of the crystal veins, a permanent, beautiful dawn in the heart of the world. It was a masterpiece of goblin engineering and sheer determination, a testament to their resilience. Having built his new domain, Gromthar surveyed his creation. He stood upon the highest balcony of his new palace, looking out over the glowing city of Glimmerdeep, and a new ambition took root in his heart. It was not enough to have saved his people. He needed to rule them. He crowned himself king, not through lineage or election, but by sheer force of will. He declared his kind, the deep goblins, superior to all others, to the sun-scorched races on the surface, and even to the dragons who had driven them into exile. His word became law, his reign absolute. The goblins, grateful for their survival, hailed him as a savior. Gromthar, the first king of the deep, had risen. For a time, the kingdom of Glimmerdeep prospered. The goblins, masters of tinkering and artifice, harnessed the magical properties of their new home. They crafted marvels, forged alloys from unknown metals, and grew fungi that provided sustenance and light. Their society flourished in the warm glow of the molten rivers. But as the kingdom grew, so too did the shadow in its king's heart. Gromthar's ambition curdled into a corrosive greed. The treasures of the earth were not enough. The loyalty of his subjects was not enough. He began to covet something far more precious, far more intimate, their very essence. This dark obsession gave birth to a terrible creation. In the deepest forge of his palace, using metals bathed in the heart's fire and quenched in rivers of crystal, Gromthar forged a weapon. It was a mace, heavy and brutal, but its true power was not in its weight. He named it Soulbreaker, and it lived up to its name. Gromthar discovered a dark, forbidden magic, a ritual that could drain the life force from a living being and bind it to an object. He saw Soulbreaker not just as a weapon, but as a vessel, a way to collect and possess the very spirit of his people. He started subtly, a lone miner who had questioned his authority, a palace guard who had shown a moment's disloyalty. One by one, he would summon them to his throne room under some false pretense. There, in the shadows of his grand hall, he would strike, With each blow of Soulbreaker, a goblin would crumble to dust, their life, their memories, their very soul absorbed into the mace. As the essence flowed into the weapon, the crystals embedded in its head would glow brighter, pulsing with a malevolent, stolen light. The king felt a rush of power unlike anything he had ever known. He was not just ruling his subjects, he was becoming them, absorbing their strength into his own. The disappearances became more frequent. Whispers of the king's call spread through the glowing streets of Glimmerdeep. Fear, cold and sharp, began to replace the gratitude his people once felt. They saw the change in him. His eyes, once sharp and cunning, now held a hungry, vacant stare. He spent less and less time governing, and more time in his throne room, clutching Soulbreaker, its captured souls whispering promises of eternal power into his mind. The kingdom he had built began to crumble, not from external threat, but from the rot at its core. The goblin population dwindled, families vanished overnight. Entire districts of the once bustling city fell silent. The forges grew cold, the mines were abandoned. The remaining goblins lived in constant terror, hiding in the shadows, avoiding the sight of the palace from which no one ever returned. Gromthar, however, was lost to reason. The greed had devoured him completely. He no longer saw subjects to rule, only fuel for his mace. He hunted them down, his laughter echoing through the empty halls as Soulbreaker drank its fill. Soon there was no one left to serve him, no one to fear him. The last goblin, a young artisan who had once crafted a silver filigree for the queen's forgotten crown, was taken. As his essence joined the chorus within Soulbreaker, a dreadful silence fell over the vast, empty kingdom of Glimmerdeep. Gromthar was alone. Utterly and completely alone. The king of a kingdom of ghosts, ruler of a city of silence. The power he had craved now felt hollow. The whispers from Soulbreaker, once a symphony of strength, were now a maddening cacophony. He would wander the silent, gilded halls, his footsteps the only sound. He would stand before his immense treasure hoard, a mountain of gold and gems that now seemed worthless. And he would talk to them. He would whisper to the jewels, telling them of his greatness, begging them for company, for a response that would never come. His mind, shattered by solitude and the thousands of stolen souls screaming within his weapon, finally broke. Alone and maddened, King Gromthar stood vigil over his dead kingdom, clutching the mace that had been both his triumph and his undoing. Centuries passed. Above ground, the age of dragons ended. New civilizations rose and fell. The world forgot the goblins who had fled into the earth. The story of Glimmerdeep faded from a cautionary tale into a forgotten myth. But the earth keeps its secrets. Eventually, a new age of exploration dawned. Hardy adventurers and curious scholars, driven by rumors of lost underground worlds, delved deeper than any had before. They followed ancient maps, deciphered crumbling runes, and finally broke through a wall of rock into a place beyond their wildest dreams. They found Glimmerdeep. The city was still there, preserved in the timeless dark. The rivers of gold had cooled to solid, shimmering roads. The crystals in the walls still pulsed with a faint, ghostly light. It was a breathtaking, yet profoundly sorrowful sight. A silent, perfectly preserved tomb of a city. The explorers walked through its empty streets, their voices echoing in the oppressive silence. They marveled at the architecture, the artistry, the sheer scale of it all. Their exploration eventually led them to the royal palace and to the throne room. There they found him. Before a throne of obsidian and gold sat a skeletal figure, still standing, as if frozen in a final moment of defiance. Its bony fingers were wrapped tightly, possessively, around a large, crystal-studded mace. It was the skeleton of King Gromthar, his greed so powerful it had held his body upright even in death. The explorers approached cautiously, drawn by the macabre sight and the strange, faint light emanating from the weapon. As one of them reached out, a gloved hand hovering just inches from the mace, a sound broke the centuries of silence. It wasn't loud. It was a faint, chilling whisper, seeming to rise from the very core of the mace, from the swirling spectral light within its crystals. It was a collective voice, a chorus of the damned, speaking with a single, ancient hunger. The whisper slithered through the cold air of the tomb, and every explorer heard it as clearly as if it were spoken into their own ear. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of ages of solitude and an undying hunger. Another soul for the king. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the dark heart of the earth. Welcome, seekers of forgotten lore, to a tale etched not in ink, but in stone and shadow. Journey with me to a place forgotten by the sun, to a hall where time itself has turned to dust. Here, upon a throne carved from bone and ancient dragon scale, sits the Lord of Shadows, a figure caught between memory and nightmare. He wasn't always this spectre of silence. Once, he was a king of men, a conqueror whose name was carried on the wind like a storm. His armies marched under a banner of iron and flame, and kingdoms fell before him like wheat before the scythe. He was a master of his world, a ruler whose ambition knew no bounds. To secure his dominion, he achieved the impossible. He enslaved the dragons, the very fire of the earth, bending their might to his will. His power was absolute, his reign supreme, but power, as the old tales warn, always demands a price. The greater the power, the crueler the cost. His heart, once fired by ambition, grew cold with avarice and tyranny. He saw threats in every shadow, betrayal in every loyal gaze. The warmth of human connection faded, replaced by the chilling isolation of the throne. And in the very moment his heart turned to stone, a terrible magic, born of his own cruelty, was unleashed. The magnificent dragons he had chained, his living symbols of conquest, were caught in the backlash of his own frozen soul. Their scales, once shimmering with life, dulled and hardened. Their fiery breath turned to silent, cold rock. They became statues, eternal monuments to his reign and his ruin, their silent screams echoing in the vast, empty hall. His greatest strength became his permanent prison, and so he sits, bound to his throne, neither truly alive nor wholly dead. A king of a silent, petrified court. His earthly form is but a husk, a statue of regret, his eyes staring into an eternity of his own making. The same curse that fossilized his dragons now holds him captive, a king of dust in a kingdom of stone. Across his lap rests his legendary sword, a blade that once carved empires from the land. Its edge is still keen, its metal humming with a dormant, terrible power. It lies there untouched for centuries, waiting. For legend whispers a prophecy through the cobwebs and the silence. It speaks of a challenger, a soul brave or foolish enough to enter this dead kingdom. It says that whoever can pry the blade from the Lord of Shadows' stony grasp will break the curse that binds him. But freedom for the king comes at a staggering cost for the challenger. To claim the sword is to claim the throne. To claim the throne is to inherit not just his crown of forgotten glory, but also his curse of eternal solitude. Imagine standing before him. The air is thick with the dust of ages, heavy with a silence that presses in on you. The only sound is the frantic beating of your own heart. Before you is the ultimate prize, the symbol of absolute power. The sword seems to beckon, promising dominion over lands you've only dreamed of. Its hilt, wrapped in dragon hide, feels like it was made for your hand. You reach out, your fingers trembling as they brush against the cold, unyielding grip of the Shadow Lord. For a moment you think you see a flicker in those dead eyes, a spark of awareness, of hope, or perhaps a warning. Is this a test of strength or a trap for the ambitious? Do you seek to liberate a fallen king, or are you merely the next fool in a long line of would-be conquerors, destined to become the next statue in this hall of despair? The choice is a crucible. To walk away is to return to the world of the living, to sunlight and laughter, but to forever wonder what might have been. To grasp the sword is to gamble your very soul. You would become a legend, a name whispered in fear and awe. You would command the power that once conquered the world. But you would be alone. Your throne would be bone, your companions stone dragons, and your kingdom an empire of dust. The warmth of the sun would become a distant memory, and the touch of another person, a forgotten dream. This is the riddle of the throne of dust. It is not just about a sword or a crown, but about the nature of power itself. It asks us what we are willing to sacrifice for greatness. Is a lonely eternity, ruling over shadows, worth more than a fleeting, warm life among mortals? What good is a crown if there is no one left to see you wear it? The Lord of Shadows waits, his silence a testament to his own answer. He chose power, and now he is its prisoner. The sword rests upon his knees, a silent invitation and a dire warning. The throne is empty yet occupied, and the question hangs in the dead air of the hall, waiting for you. Would you dare to claim it? In the hushed twilight of existence, when the final star had wept its last ray of light, and the cosmic chorus fell into an eternal silence, only one sovereign remained. He was not a king of vibrant life or bustling empires, but the solitary monarch of the void, the somber ruler of all that fades. They called him the Reaper King. Cloaked in the very essence of shadow, a swirling nebula of darkness and forgotten dreams, he presided over a kingdom of endings. His throne was a testament to the magnificent past, meticulously carved from the obsidian scales of the last great dragon. This colossal beast, a creature of myth and legend, was his silent, eternal companion. Its massive form coiled around the throne, a protective, petrified embrace. Its breath, which once could melt mountains, was long extinguished, yet its eyes, vast pools of ancient wisdom, remained forever open, forever watching the desolate expanse before them. They had seen the birth and death of galaxies, and now they saw only him. In his hand, he held a blade unlike any other. It was not forged from earthly metals, but from the captured, dying light of the stars themselves. Starlight was woven into its very being, pulsing with a faint, ethereal glow, the last remnant of a universe that once shone so brightly. This sword held a terrible and beautiful duality. With one swing, it could command absolute destruction, unraveling the very fabric of reality. With another, it could spark the fire of creation, igniting the genesis of a new cosmos. It was the ultimate choice, the final say in the grand cycle of existence. His solitude was profound, a silence broken only by the whisper of cosmic dust. Yet his reign was not without its subjects, however infrequent. Every 1,000 years, as the great celestial clock completed another rotation, a figure would emerge from the nothingness. A mortal soul, drawn by the last echo of power in the universe, would find its way to the foot of his draconic throne. They came for different reasons, their hearts heavy with the burdens of their long-lost worlds. Some, with eyes hollowed by despair, knelt and pleaded for mercy, for a swift and painless end to the encroaching emptiness. They sought oblivion, a final release from the memory of loss. Others, with ambition still burning in their spirits, begged for power. They saw the end not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity, a blank canvas upon which they could paint their own desires to rule over the ashes and dust. They craved the authority to command what little remained. Through the millennia, he had seen them all, the desperate, the defiant, the hopeful, and the damned. He listened to their stories, their impassioned speeches, their quiet sobs. He felt the weight of their final wishes, the last expressions of will in a dying universe. But the Reaper King, in his infinite, lonely wisdom, never offered a simple yes or no. He would not be swayed by tears or promises. Instead, As the mortal finished their plea, he would lean forward slightly from his great throne. The shadows around him would deepen, and from the void beneath his hood a voice would emerge, not loud, but carrying the weight of ages, a whisper that resonated in the very soul of the listener. He would ask only one question, the same question he had asked for time immemorial. His voice, a soft rustle of dying leaves and distant thunder, would pose the ultimate choice. Do you seek to end the world, or begin it anew? The answer would determine everything. It was not a test of strength or cunning, but a reflection of the heart's deepest intent. Did they wish to pull the final thread and let all unravel into true, absolute nothingness? Or did they possess the courage, the hope, the sheer audacity to dream of a new dawn, a new creation born from the embers of the old? The mortal would stand there, bathed in the faint silvery light of his starlight sword, the silent watchful eyes of the dragon upon them, and in that moment the fate of not just one soul, but of reality itself, hung in the balance, resting on the answer to that simple yet profound question. For in the kingdom of the end, the Reaper King was not just a destroyer. He was the gatekeeper of all possible futures, the keeper of the last, flickering flame of potential in an otherwise dark and silent universe. Have you ever been awake in the dead of night, when the world is utterly still and silent, when the only sound is the beating of your own heart? It's in these moments, they say, that the veil between worlds is at its thinnest. It's when you might just hear it, a distant whistle carried on the midnight air, a sound that doesn't belong to any train you know. This is the sound of the Midnight Express, the Phantom Train. It doesn't run on any schedule known to man, nor does it travel on tracks of cold, hard steel. It glides through the world we know, yet remains unseen, unheard by the living. It materializes from the thickest fog, a silhouette of steam and shadow, its purpose singular and solemn. Its journey begins long after the last lights of the city have gone out. It moves through forgotten landscapes, past derelict buildings and overgrown fields, places where memories linger like ghosts. The train stops at stations that no longer exist on any map, spectral platforms shimmering under the moonlight, where the air is heavy with sorrow and longing. And at these forgotten stops, figures wait. They are the newly departed, the souls who have just crossed the threshold from life. They stand in quiet patience, a silent crowd of translucent shapes, their earthly ties severed, waiting for their final passage. They are the passengers of the afterlife. Leading this spectral procession is a figure as timeless and mysterious as the train itself. He is known only as the conductor. He walks the length of the platform, a steady, unhurried presence. But if you were to look upon him, you would see no face. He is headless, a being defined not by features but by his duty. He is eternal, a constant in the endless cycle of departure. In his hand, he carries a single lantern. It's not lit by oil or electricity. It glows with an eerie, ghostly green light, a beacon in the perpetual twilight of his domain. This light is not a simple flame. It is a swirling nebula of captured souls, the essence of those who have become lost along the way. With every new passenger that steps aboard the train, the green flame inside the lantern flickers, a silent acknowledgement of another soul beginning its journey. The lantern serves as both a guide and a prison, its light a symbol of passage and a warning of what it means to be truly lost. The train itself is a marvel of otherworldly design. Its carriages are old, fashioned from dark, polished wood that seems to drink the light. Inside, the seats are plush velvet, but they offer no comfort. The windows are perpetually misty, showing not the passing landscape, but reflections of the passengers' past lives, fleeting images of joy, sorrow, love, and regret. A silent movie playing out for an audience of one. There is no laughter here, no conversation, only the rhythmic clatter of the spectral wheels and the soft, collective sigh of memory. The conductor moves through the carriages with a silent, gliding grace. He doesn't check tickets, for your presence on this train is your ticket. He is a shepherd, guiding his flock, ensuring each soul finds its designated place. His presence is not menacing, but it is absolute. He is a force of nature, an integral part of the transition, as inevitable as death itself. There are legends, of course, stories whispered by those who live near old abandoned railway lines. They speak of certain nights, particularly when the moon is hidden and the fog rolls in thick from the rivers, when the air grows unnaturally cold. On these nights, they say, you can feel a tremor in the ground, a vibration that has no earthly source. Then, the mournful cry of the train's whistle echoes through the darkness. Those who have been brave or foolish enough to look report seeing a faint emerald glow cutting through the mist, the lantern of the conductor bobbing in the darkness as he walks ahead of his phantom engine. They see the outline of the train, a ghost of iron and steam, passing silently through solid objects, leaving no trace of its passage save for a sudden chill in the air. The warning passed down through generations is always the same. If you see the green light, if you hear that lonely whistle, turn away, do not watch. Do not follow. It's a mesmerizing sight, a mystery that pulls at the curious heart. But that light is not for you. The call of that whistle is not an invitation. To follow that train is to risk your own soul. The conductor is a guide for the departed, not a tour guide for the living. Should you stray too close, captivated by the spectral sight, you might find that the boundary between spectator and passenger is thinner than you ever imagined. You might find yourself standing on a platform you didn't know existed, the green lantern light casting your own long, wavering shadow. And if you step aboard, know this train isn't taking you home. It's not a journey back to the familiar, to the comfort of what you know. The Midnight Express has only one destination. It travels to the place that comes after, the great unknown, the final horizon. The conductor's job is to ensure you arrive. He is taking you beyond. So the next time you find yourself awake in the deepest hour of the night and a strange chill prickles your skin, listen closely. Listen for a sound that shouldn't be there. And if you hear the distant, lonely whistle of a train, pull your blankets tighter, close your eyes, and think of the morning. Because the conductor is making his rounds, and his train is only for those who have a one-way ticket. Imagine a world poised on the brink, where the very fabric of the sky begins to tear, not with a gentle rip, but a violent crack, as if the universe itself is breaking apart. Picture the sun, not as a golden orb of life, but as a wounded deity, bleeding crimson and violet across the horizon. This isn't just a sunset, it's a celestial hemorrhage, the final breathtaking gasp of a dying age. And from this cosmic wound, a figure descends, not with the gentle grace of an angel, but with the terrifying finality of an ending. This is the seraph of the final hour. Look closer if you dare. His form is not of flesh and blood, but of bone, glowing with an internal divine light. It's a light that should be pure, holy, a beacon of hope. Yet, this divine skeleton is flawed. A network of fractures runs through him like lightning frozen in time, dark fissures across his radiant form. These aren't recent battle scars, they are ancient wounds, remnants of a celestial rebellion so long forgotten that its history has faded even from the memory of the stars. He is a walking, luminous ruin, a testament to a war that shook the foundations of heaven itself. Who was he before this descent? Before the fractures and the bleeding sky? He was heaven's first sword, the blade of dawn, the guardian of absolute purity. His purpose was singular, to defend the immaculate light against any shadow. His wings, once whole and blazing, were the standard under which legions of angels marched. His voice, now silent, once sang the first notes of creation's hymn. He was perfection incarnate, the embodiment of divine will, unwavering and absolute. The cosmos bowed to his strength, and darkness cowered from his gaze. But a guardian cannot stand watch without observing. He gazed too long, too deeply into the hearts of mortals. He sought to understand the world he was tasked to protect, and in doing so, he saw it all. He witnessed the soaring heights of human kindness, the quiet courage of a single soul against impossible odds, the selfless love that could bloom even in the harshest soil. He saw a beauty that heaven, in its perfect stasis, could never replicate. The raw, chaotic and breathtaking resilience of humanity fascinated him. Yet, where there is light, shadows are cast. His unwavering gaze also pierced through the veils of civility and hope, down into the abyss of the human spirit. He saw the darkness that even the divine could not fully comprehend or cleanse. He witnessed treachery born from love, cruelty disguised as justice, and an insatiable hunger for power that could consume entire civilizations. He saw a profound capacity for self-destruction that mirrored the chaos of the void. This duality, this impossible paradox of good and evil, intertwined within a single soul, began to change him. It planted a seed of doubt, a question that echoed in the perfect halls of heaven. If creation was flawed, was its creator not also? This question was his heresy. His doubt became a rebellion, not of swords and fire, but of understanding and empathy. He argued for a new way, a balance, but heaven only understands absolutes. For his transgression, for daring to see the gray in a universe designed in black and white, he was shattered. Not cast out, but broken from within. His very essence was fractured, his connection to celestial grace severed. He fell from his station, not into the fiery pits of hell, but into the lonely, silent space between realms. And so he stands now, a solitary figure caught in the eternal twilight between heaven and hell. He is neither saint nor demon, angel nor fiend. He has shed the dogma of the celestial host and rejected the nihilism of the abyss. He is an entity of his own making, a third way, a final answer to an impossible cosmic equation. He has become the arbiter, the judge of a reality that both of the great powers have failed to either save or corrupt entirely. He is the consequence of their eternal war. In his hands, he wields a scythe. But this is no simple farmer's tool or grim reaper's blade. It was forged from the shattered halos of his fallen comrades, the very symbols of divine purity, now melted down and repurposed for a final, terrible task. The weapon hums with a sorrowful energy, a chorus of lost grace and forgotten oaths. It is a tool of judgment, but not of punishment. Each swing does not condemn a soul to eternal torment or grant it endless bliss. Instead, it ends the cycle. When the scythe falls upon a sinner, there is no fire, no screams, just a quiet unmaking. The soul, burdened by its darkness, simply dissolves into dust, its tormented energy released back into the cosmic whole, free from its pain. When the scythe meets an angel, there is no glorious ascension. The divine being turns to memory, its light fading into the history of the universe, its rigid purpose finally laid to rest. He offers not salvation or damnation, but oblivion, a quiet, merciful end to the exhausting game of cosmic morality. He is the ultimate release. His presence warps the world around him. When his fractured skeletal wings unfold, they do not catch the wind. Instead, they silence it. Time itself holds its breath, the ticking of the universal clock slowing to a halt. Motion freezes, sound dies. All of existence pauses in anticipation of his judgment, for where the seraph of the final hour walks, the laws of creation unravel. The old rules no longer apply. The eternal struggle loses its meaning. He walks the bleeding edge of reality, a solitary monarch of the end. He is the final period at the end of creation's long, complicated sentence. He is the moment when the story concludes and the book is closed. He is not an agent of chaos, but of order, the final, absolute order of silence. He is the seraph of the final hour. And when you see the sky crack and the sun bleed, know that judgment has not come for you. Mercy has. The mercy of a definitive silent end. His arrival is not a threat, but a promise fulfilled. The promise of peace at the cost of everything. Have you ever wondered what happens when an angel falls? Not just falls, but shatters. Before humanity drew its first breath, there was an archangel named Azael. His light wasn't just bright, it was a beacon that rivaled the stars themselves. He was a commander, a celestial general leading legions of angels, his voice a cornerstone in the choir of eternity. He was bathed in glory, the very picture of divine perfection. But perfection can be a fragile thing. Within that brilliant light, a seed of pride took root. It grew in the silence between hymns, fed by the reverence of lesser angels and the echoes of his own power. This pride became a fissure, a crack in the flawless crystal of his being. It led to a war, a conflict so devastating it split the very gates of heaven. Brothers fought brothers, light clashed with light, and the celestial realm was scarred forever. In this cataclysmic battle, Azael was cast down. His fall was not a gentle descent, but a violent tearing plunge through the cosmos. His magnificent wings, once feathered with pure starlight, were ripped from his back. They didn't burn or turn to ash. Instead, in the crucible of his fall, they were reforged. The divine essence, twisted by pride and rage, crystallized into a pair of razor-sharp blades, shimmering with a cold, unforgiving light. Now, after eons spent in the abyss, Azael rises once more, but he is not the radiant servant heaven once knew. He is its reckoning. His return is not a plea for forgiveness, but a declaration of war. He is a broken thing made whole by vengeance. Imagine him now. His halo, once a perfect, unwavering circle of gold, now flickers erratically, like a dying sun on the verge of collapse. It sputters and dims, a crown of fractured light that casts long, dancing shadows. His very bones, once filled with divine grace, now hum with a terrifying celestial fury, a low, resonant thrum of power waiting to be unleashed. He is a paradox. A holy being fueled by an unholy rage. When he walks the earth, a strange phenomenon occurs. The dead rise from their graves, but not as a mindless army to fight for him. They are silent spectators. They climb from the soil and stand on hillsides and rooftops, their hollow eyes fixed on him. They are the audience to this final tragic act, drawn by the sheer magnitude of his sorrow and fury. They rise not to fight, but simply to witness the fall of heaven itself. Every step Azael takes upon a battlefield is an apocalyptic event. The ground cracks beneath his feet, not from his weight, but from the sheer concentration of his power. Worlds that stand in his way don't just burn, they are consumed by a cold, white fire that leaves nothing but cosmic dust. The skies above don't just darken, they collapse inward, folding into vortices of chaos and despair. And in the highest realms, the heavens themselves weep. They weep not tears of anger, but of sorrow. They cry for the son they lost, for the perfection they created that ultimately turned against them. They weep because Azael's return is a terrifying reminder that no one, not even an archangel, is safe from the flaws hidden within their own perfection. His story is the ultimate tragedy, the brightest light casting the darkest shadow. This is the saga of the broken archangel, a story of how glory can curdle into pride, and how even the divine can be consumed by their own inner demons. His war is not just against heaven, but against the memory of what he once was, a battle against a perfection he can never reclaim. And as he marches forward, with his crystal wings gleaming and the dead bearing witness, one question hangs in the collapsing sky. When a being of pure light declares war, can there be any true victor? Or will all of creation simply burn in the wake of his magnificent, terrible fall? Thank you so much for joining me on this dive into the lore of Azael. They say that at the very edge of the Blackwood Marsh, where the mist clings to the ground like a shroud, there stands the ruin of an old chapel. It's a place most folks avoid, a place where the air feels heavy and the silence is watchful. But it wasn't always this way. Years ago, it was home to a priest, a man named Father Alistair. Alistair wasn't just any priest. His faith was legendary, said to be a beacon so bright it could pierce any darkness. People from all corners of the land would seek him out, their souls burdened with sins they felt were beyond redemption. They'd kneel in his small stone confessional, whispering their darkest secrets, and Alistair, with his calm voice and unwavering gaze, would grant them absolution. They said his faith was so pure, so absolute, that even demons would falter before him, their lies turning to dust on their tongues. He was a bastion against the encroaching shadows, a lone candle in a world growing dim. The chapel was his sanctuary, a fortress of piety against the wild marsh that surrounded it. He believed no evil could breach its consecrated walls. He was wrong. It happened on a night when the moon was hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds and a storm was brewing on the horizon. The wind howled through the reeds, sounding like mournful cries. Alistair was preparing to close the chapel, his prayers for the day finished, when the heavy oak door creaked open. A figure stood silhouetted against the deepening twilight. It was a traveler, wrapped in a heavy, dark cloak that seemed to drink the light from the room. A hood was pulled low, completely obscuring their face. The figure moved with an unnatural grace, not a single drop of rain or speck of mud on their boots, despite the coming storm. Alistair, ever the dutiful servant, gestured towards the confessional. "You are welcome here, child," he said, his voice warm. "The storm is coming. Find shelter for your body and peace for your soul." The traveler didn't respond, but glided silently into the darkness of the confessional booth. Alistair felt a faint, almost imperceptible chill creep into the chapel, a cold that had nothing to do with the night air. He settled into his own side of the booth, sliding the wooden panel open. The screen between them was a veil of shadow. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned," a voice whispered from the other side. It was a strange voice, layered and ancient, like stones grinding together deep within the earth. The air that carried it felt dry and hot, and it smelled faintly of sulfur and ash. Alistair waited. Usually the confessions would pour out, tales of theft, of betrayal, of anger. But the traveler remained silent for a long moment. The only sound was the wind and the distant rumble of thunder. "My child," Alistair prompted gently, "God's mercy is infinite. Whatever burdens you, you can lay it down here. Do not be afraid." A low, guttural chuckle came from the other side. It wasn't a sound of mirth, it was a sound of immense, ancient amusement. "Afraid? Oh, Father, it is not I who should be afraid." The voice continued, and the stories it told began to unravel the very fabric of Alistair's faith. This was not a confession of human failing. There was no petty jealousy, no greed, no fleeting moment of wrath. Instead, the traveler spoke of stoking the first ember of pride in a perfect heart. It described twisting love into possessive obsession, whispering the first lie into a world that had only known truth. It confessed to planting the seeds of envy that would make one brother strike down another. It spoke of coaxing despair into the souls of the hopeful until they saw no other escape. With each word, the small confessional grew colder, the shadows deeper. Alistair felt the marrow in his bones begin to freeze. He was listening to the architect of damnation, the author of all the sins he had spent his life absolving. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was no man. This was a test beyond any he had ever imagined. His faith was his shield, his only weapon. He gripped the crucifix that hung around his neck, its smooth wood usually a source of comfort, now feeling like a flimsy splinter. You are a liar," Alistair stammered, his voice trembling. "A demon sent to test me. Be gone. In the name of God, I command you." Another low chuckle, this one laced with a terrible pity. "Test you? No, Father, I am not here for a test. I am here to confess." Then, the traveler did something that shattered Alistair's world. It began to recite the sins of the people Alistair had just absolved that very day. The secret greed of the merchant, the hidden affair of the baker's wife, the violent thoughts of the gentle-faced farmer. It knew them all in perfect, excruciating detail. "I was there, Father," the voice hissed. "In their hearts, in their minds. I whispered to them, I offered the suggestions. They simply chose to listen. I gave them the tools, but they built their own prisons. Whose sin is greater? The one who creates the temptation, or the one who succumbs?" Alistair's breath caught in his throat. He was drowning in an ocean of pure, unadulterated evil. The consecrated ground of his chapel felt profane beneath his feet. The holy relics on the walls seemed to mock him. What are you?" Alistair whispered, his voice barely audible. The figure on the other side shifted. "You spend your life forgiving the echoes of sin. I thought it was time you heard from the voice itself." Slowly, the traveler reached up and pushed back its hood. In the suffocating darkness of the confessional, 2 points of light ignited. They were not eyes in any human sense. They were burning crimson embers, filled with ancient malice and an unbearable sadness. They burned through the screen, through the shadows, and seared themselves into Alistair's very soul. "Forgive me, Father," the thing whispered, its smoky breath filling the small space, "for I have created sin." That was the moment Father Alistair screamed. It was a scream of pure, primal terror, a sound of a soul shattering. But the sound never left the chapel. It was swallowed by the stone walls, by the oppressive silence, by the ancient presence that sat just inches away from him. The storm broke outside. But inside the chapel, a far greater storm had just consumed a man's entire world. No one ever saw Father Alistair again. The chapel fell into disuse, and soon into ruin. The marsh began to reclaim it, reeds growing through the floorboards, vines strangling the stone walls. But the story doesn't end there. The locals who dare to venture near the marsh's edge, especially on those nights when the wind is high and carries the faint smell of ash, they say you can still hear something. If you listen closely, you can hear the desperate, hoarse whispers of a priest endlessly begging for a forgiveness he can no longer grant. And if you listen even more closely, beneath the sound of the wind and the reeds, you might just hear something else. A low, patient rumble, like stones grinding together deep within the earth. The sound of something ancient and terrible listening back. Thank you for joining me in the shadows tonight. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more tales from the darkness. Stay safe out there, and whatever you do, be careful what you confess and to whom. Have you ever heard the whispers about the old church on the hill? The one with the boarded-up doors and the roof that's slowly collapsing in on itself? It wasn't always a ruin. Long ago, it was the heart of a village, filled with hymns and prayers. But that all ended during the last sermon. They say the priest was in the middle of his homily when a strange crimson light started pouring from the stained glass windows. It wasn't the warm glow of the setting sun, it was something else, something sinister. The light pooled on the floor like spilled wine, and from its reflection, something began to stir. Something crawled out. The villagers who survived that day described a creature with skin like cracked stone and eyes that held the fires of damnation. It stood where the priest had been, its shadow stretching long and twisted across the pews. It didn't roar or attack. It spoke. Its voice was like grinding rock, yet it promised something irresistible: salvation, eternal beauty, a life free from the ravages of time and sickness. But the price was steep. All it asked for in return was their souls. Chaos erupted. Some were tempted, their eyes wide with a desperate hope. Others screamed and fled, scrambling over each other to escape the unholy light. The sermon ended in blood, but whose blood, the stories never quite agree. All they know is that when the sun rose the next morning, the church was empty, save for the priest, who was found clutching his cross, his face frozen in a mask of pure terror. The villagers, in their fear, sealed the church. They boarded up the windows, barred the doors, and swore never to speak of what happened inside. For generations, the church stood abandoned, a dark silhouette against the sky, a warning. But you know how stories are. They grow, they change, and they beckon the curious. Travelers and thrill-seekers began to visit, daring each other to peek through the cracks in the boarded-up walls. They wanted to see if the legends were true. Most saw nothing but dust and decay, but a few, the ones who came at the dead of night, under a sliver of a moon, they saw something more. They claimed that if you look at just the right angle, through just the right crack, you can see it. The creature, the keeper of the stained glass. It still stands before the altar, unmoving, a faint crimson glow illuminating its form. Its stone lips are pulled back in a permanent, chilling smile. It seems to be waiting. And this is the most disturbing part of the legend. The church's original stained glass windows have been shattered for centuries, yet new ones keep appearing. Every few years, a traveler who goes to the church at night disappears without a trace. And shortly after, a new, small, exquisitely crafted piece of glass appears in the window frames. They're perfectly circular, and they glitter with an eerie, lifelike quality. The remaining locals have a theory. They believe the demon is a craftsman, a patient collector. They say those new windows aren't made of glass at all. They're crafted from the eyes of the curious who got too close. The glassy, frozen eyes of those who stared into damnation and paid the price for a glimpse of its terrible beauty. Each new piece is a soul, captured and displayed for eternity, adding to the demon's collection. So if you ever find yourself walking near that old, ruined church on the hill, and you feel a pull to peek inside, remember the story. The keeper of the stained glass is always looking for new materials for its art. It's always smiling, and it's always waiting for the next beautiful pair of eyes to add to its window. What do you think? Is this just a local legend to scare off trespassers? Or is there a creature of stone and shadow patiently waiting inside that crumbling church? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. And if you enjoy diving into dark legends like this one, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from the shadows. Stay safe out there. In the shadowed heart of St. Erathis, where stone sweats with forgotten prayers, the villagers of the old valley speak in hushed tones of a presence known only as the White Choir. They say it is a phantom of phantoms, a spectre woven from the burial shrouds of those who were denied their final rest. A chilling legend meant to keep curious children away from the crumbling ruins. But legends, as we know, often have roots in terrifying truths. This choir, they whisper, graces our world only once a century, a grim anniversary marked by an unsettling silence that falls over the land. The Cathedral of St. Erathis had long been abandoned, its grandeur decaying under the relentless siege of time and nature. Ivy crept through the shattered stained glass windows like green skeletal fingers, and the pews were coated in a thick velvet of dust. No priest had dared to set foot inside for generations, not since the last one vanished without a trace, leaving behind only his sanctified robes and a lingering scent of ozone. The villagers believed the place was cursed, a gateway to somewhere unholy. The stories passed down were fragmented, nightmarish tales of a chorus that wasn't sung by the living. But this year was different. A new priest, Father Alaric, had arrived in the valley. He was a man of stern faith and unyielding will, a man who saw the fear in the villagers' eyes not as a warning, but as a challenge. He scoffed at their superstitions, dismissing them as the fanciful fears of simple folk. "The house of God is never truly abandoned," he declared, his voice ringing with conviction. "It is merely waiting for a shepherd to reclaim the lost." He was determined to reconsecrate the cathedral, to cleanse it of whatever darkness had taken root and return it to the light. The elders pleaded with him, their faces etched with a genuine terror he couldn't comprehend. They told him of the date, of the century-long cycle, but he would not be swayed. "Faith," he said, "is the strongest shield." On the prophesied night, under a sliver of a moon that offered little comfort, Father Alaric pushed open the massive, groaning doors of St. Erathis. A gust of cold, stale air rushed out to meet him, carrying a scent of damp earth, decaying wood, and something else. Something faintly metallic and sweet, like old blood. The silence within was profound, a physical weight that pressed in on him. He held his lantern high, its golden light barely piercing the oppressive gloom. The nave stretched before him like a vast, empty maw. As he stepped inside, the heavy doors slammed shut behind him with a boom that echoed like a final judgment. He was not deterred. He began his ritual, his Latin incantations echoing in the cavernous space. But as he walked towards the altar, he felt it. The air began to tremble, to vibrate with an unseen energy. Every breath he took felt thick, heavy, as if he were inhaling not air, but whispers. The whispers grew, a cacophony of sibilant, overlapping voices, too faint to understand, but carrying a clear, undiluted agony. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, from the stones, from the shadows, from the very air he was breathing. His faith was a formidable shield, but even the strongest shield can crack. A shiver of primal fear, an instinct he thought he had long since conquered, traced a cold path down his spine. Then he saw it. In the deepest shadows of the apse, behind the grand, desolate altar, something began to coalesce. It was a formless dread at first, a patch of darkness that seemed to drink the lantern light. Then it rose and rose. A towering figure, impossibly tall, draped in what looked like countless layers of writhing gossamer veils. The material shifted and flowed like smoke, or perhaps like water, and he realized with a jolt of horror that these were not veils. They were burial shrouds, hundreds of them, woven together into a single monstrous tapestry, and at the end of each tattered, flowing strip of cloth was a hand. A pale, skeletal hand, fingers long and thin, twitching, grasping at the empty air. Father Alaric froze, his prayer dying on his lips. The figure, this white choir, had no face, no discernible body beneath the shrouds, only the silent, grasping hands. It was a monument to loss, a living effigy of despair. He stared, mesmerized by the sheer, unholy wrongness of it. It was a sight that fractured reason, a being that defied all known laws of God and man. The whispers in the air grew louder, clearer, coalescing into distinct, sorrowful sighs. Then the creature raised its many arms. The shrouds billowed, the pale hands lifted in a ghastly, silent symphony. And from each hand, a voice erupted. It was not a song of praise, but a shriek of eternal suffering, 1,000 souls screaming in perfect, horrifying unison. The voices were a torment. Men, women, children, each one a unique note of pain blended into a single deafening chord of damnation. It was the sound of 1,000 lifetimes of misery, of violent ends and lonely graves, of prayers that were never answered. The sound hit Alaric like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs and bringing him to his knees. The lantern fell from his grasp, sputtered and died, plunging the cathedral into near-total darkness, save for the faint, ethereal glow emanating from the choir itself. He scrambled backward, his mind screaming a single word: "Flee!" He turned, crawling blindly in the dark, his hands searching for the familiar shape of the main doors, but the choir sang louder. The very stones of the cathedral seemed to absorb the sound, vibrating with its power. The screams burrowed into his skull, tearing at his sanity. He felt the history of each voice: the soldier dying in the mud, the mother lost in childbirth, the child forgotten in the plague. Their agony became his faith, once an unshakable fortress, crumbled into dust. The shield was shattered. He pushed himself to his feet and ran, stumbling over fallen debris, his only guide the faint moonlight filtering through the broken windows. The doors were just ahead. He could almost feel the cool night air. But the hymn of the damned swelled to a crescendo. It wrapped around him, not just sound, but a force. It lifted him from his feet, holding him suspended in the air before the great, terrible figure. The pale hands reached for him, not to touch, but to envelop him in their collective sorrow. The last thing Father Alaric saw was a single, tattered shroud breaking away from the main body and drifting towards him, a skeletal hand at its end reaching for his face. By dawn, an unnatural quiet had settled over St. Erathis. The first rays of sun touched the ancient stone, and the church bells began to ring, tolling on their own with a slow, melancholic rhythm that chilled the very soul of the village. The next priest, a timid man sent weeks later to investigate Alaric's disappearance, found the cathedral eerily clean. The dust was gone. The air was crisp and still. At the foot of the altar, he found Father Alaric's robes, folded neatly as if in offering. And as he stood there, trembling in the vast silence, he heard it. A faint, distant echo, almost imperceptible. It was the sound of a hymn, and the faint, chilling trace of a new voice, strong and clear, joining the eternal chorus. Thank you so much for joining me on this chilling journey into the heart of St. Erathis. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the shadows. Stay safe out there, and remember, some doors are best left unopened.